Hi, we're here today to talk about the Value-Added Producer Grant and how to get an application funded as a small farm with this program. I'm Ellen Raleigh of Ellen Raleigh Creative and Strategy. I've been writing these grants for the last 10 plus years, and I'm excited today to go through the eligibility of the program and how you can get an application funded. So let's get started. Title of today's webinar is Write a High Scoring Application for the VAPG, because I don't only want you to be able to submit an application for this program if you're eligible, but actually to get on the pile of applications that get funded. So first, we're going to start with some information. I'll tell you a little bit about me so you know why I'm the person talking to you today. And I'm also going to help answer the question, are you eligible? And the second burning question most farmers have, which are what expenses can get covered by this grant? Once we get the information out of the way, we're going to move into some inspiration. So, looking at real projects that have gotten funded is a great way to start brainstorming how this program could be useful to your own farm. And lastly, I'll talk about the five-phase approach that I recommend for actually writing an application. This is the approach that I use both in my one-on-one grant writing services and also through my mentorship, which is a guided approach for folks who want to write the grant themselves. I'll say the acronyms VAPG and USDA RD possibly a lot of times in the next hour. So VAPG means Value Added Producer Grant. USDA RD stands for the United States Department of Agriculture Rural Development. That is who offers this grant and who will be scoring your application and deciding if you get funded. I host this webinar every year because I am very passionate about this program. It's a pretty unique way to, or a pretty unique opportunity in that it will fund expenses related to sales, marketing, and processing, things that are often hard for small farms to find funding sources for these days. Um, and I decided to start hosting this webinar because I found that it is a program that small farms can get funded through. You don't have to be a large farm to get access to this money. But a lot of small farms don't necessarily know too much about the program or how to approach a grant application. And so I really want more small farms to be funded, and this is my way to help fill that gap. You can see here that since 2022, the amount of funding that is available for the program has steadily gone down, and that there are a lot more requests for funding than actual funding, meaning there's a lot more applications that get submitted than actually get funded. I want your application to end up on the funded pile. So that's why we're talking through eligibility and then also strategy today. A little bit about why I'm the person talking to you. So, um, my history in agriculture started actually abroad when I was studying abroad in college in Thailand. I got really passionate about small farmers there who were rice farmers. And they had banded together to own their own rice mill so that instead of selling a commodity crop straight to middlemen who would then sell to rice mills, they were able to control their own processing and the sale of final rice to customers. This change in how they sold from going from selling to a middleman, a commodity, to selling a value added good was huge in terms of their quality of life, the amount of care they were able to then give to the environment and to their communities, being able to bring profits back into the communities, building schools and all sorts of other things. So that's where I got really excited about the idea of value added and of farms really owning the crop that they sell through sales in order to maximize profits. When I came back to the United States, I ended up working for farms here, multiple farms through the farmers markets, and then one olive oil mill, olive oil farm and garden in Sonoma County in California. And that became really my passion is how do you do that here? Like, how is it possible for farms to keep more of the profits of their own production? And it turns out it's kind of nuanced and complicated. Since 2016, I left the ranch that I was working at. And since then, I've worked with all sorts of small and medium-sized farms and food businesses trying to answer that very question. And part of that work has been writing value-added producer grants. I've been doing that since 2016. It just started with a few people asking me to do it for them, and then saying yes, and then over time, kind of getting known for having a great track record in funded applications. So since then, I've secured $8.7 million in USDA funding for small farms and one farm support organization. And 2.7 million of that has been through the value added producer grant for farms in 17 states. Clients that I've worked with have gotten products featured in Oprah Magazine, Food and Wine Magazine, Whole Foods, Buy Right Market, and more. So I'm really passionate about not just getting any sort of value added product out in the world, but one that's going to have that you're going to see growth in over time. And that's really going to support the profitability of your farm. Farms we've gotten funded range, and this is why I love this program. We've gotten farms funded that had less than $10,000 in sales to over $1 million in sales. Year two of farming to multi-generational family farms, selling through farmers markets, farm stands, CSAs, local stores, grocery as an ingredient, processing on farm, working with a co-packer from selling crushed tomatoes to apple cider caramels to dried rose petals to grass-fed hot dogs to organic coleslaw mix to organic grapefruits to local wine, estate-grown wine. There's many types of projects that we've gotten funded, many sizes of farms we've gotten funded. So I really want you to let go of any worry about being a small farm and this program being right for you. So a lot of folks come with come to me with questions about eligibility and how the grant works. We're going to do this quickly because I want time for inspiration and strategy, which is really to me the biggest added value I can offer you in this time. So this is not a this is, the A to Z. If you have specific questions, you can reach out to us, or you can also reach out to your USDA RD rep. How the grant generally works. So there's two types of value-added producer grants. There's a planning grant and there's a working capital grant. Most folks are applying for a working capital grant. The general difference is that a planning grant is for planning projects, which we're going to look at in more depth when we start talking about the expenses. But these requests are less than $50,000 in funding for planning activities. Working capital grants, that is what's going to fund you actually pulling off the project, making the product, selling the product, marketing the product. Those requests are up to $250,000 in funding. The project can run up to 3 years for working capital grants, really. And there's a one-to-one match. So you are asking for grant funding. So for example, if you requested the full $250,000 in funding, you are having to match that with $250,000 of value, not dollars necessarily, because you can include the value of the raw commodity that's included in the project and the value of the owner's time on the project, up to 25% of the budget. There's also third-party cash or in kind, which is honestly very rarely included in my experience. But you can think of this as at least a one that you're at least getting $2 for every dollar you spend, because typically we're able to put enough of the raw commodity in there and enough of your owner's time in there that you end up with a budget that for every dollar that you spend, you're getting $2 back. Now, if you don't have any cash to put towards the project, you will actually score slightly less points because of that, but you can theoretically have an application where your entire match is the raw commodity and the value of the owner's time. Value of the owner's time is capped, but the amount of raw commodity, as long as the amount of product that you're making over the course of the 3 years is enough to match the value of the cash that you're asking for in combination with that owner's time, then you could theoretically put in absolutely no cash. That's never happened in my experience, but I just want you to kind of get a sense of how that match works. So to ask for $250,000 in funding, you don't need to have $250,000 in cash. Eligible expenses. So the planning grants, those are for marketing plans, business plans, and third party feasibility studies. So those grants are really great if you have an idea that you're not really sure you should pursue, and you want to get some expert opinion pursuing it. That doesn't necessarily mean that you've never made the product before. You could be making the product, but say you want to start, national shipping, or you um, sell just retail and you want to start selling it wholesale. There's some growth project you have in mind that you want to have some experts come in and either help you with a marketing plan around that idea, business plan, or a third party feasibility study. Working capital grants, like I said, that's the majority of the applications. Those focus on the actual making of the product, selling of the product, and marketing of the product. So it focuses on the value added portion of the process. So we're not going to be covering the cost of farming or harvesting the actual commodity. Um, Frequently requested ineligible expenses, just to get those out of the way, are farm events, swag, construction related expenses, large equipment purchases, and research and development expenses. Those are not eligible. You can't either put your match dollars in on those things, and you can't ask for grant funding for those things. So if you're looking to renovate a barn into a kitchen, this is not the grant that's going to help you do that. What about equipment? So, like I said, large equipment purchases are not allowed. There is a small amount of leniency for small equipment purchases. So they define that as under $5,000 each. Things that I've gotten included there are things like labelers, or like small bottling machines, printers, label printers, things like that are considered small equipment. And some things that you might think of as equipment, if like say wine barrels, some people might think of that as a piece of equipment. They actually consider that a supply. And equipment is something that's going to depreciate in value, that's really going to be like a fixed item in your processing facility or storage facility. So storage racks, a lot of times those can end up being either under small equipment or supplies. Um, and then there's another now allowance for equipment. You can have up to $6,500 to purchase or upgrade post-harvest equipment to improve food safety. There's no expenses can have a conflict of interest. It's important to note. So you can't be paying your for services or labor from direct family members. That's that conflict of interest piece. Or probably buying supplies from a business that's owned by them. Let's think through Some of the things you probably came here with a list of expenses that you are hoping to get covered by this grant. So, um, let's actually move forward. I want to do this in a different here. Ooh, let's go here first. So, you probably came with a project that you have in mind. You have a product. Maybe you have a project. Typically, folks have, a product that they're making or that they want to make, and that's what they're here for. Can I use this grant to do this? Let's take a step back there and talk about the three. Let's like build out your three kind of building blocks of what you're going to build your application around. So your application revolves around a commodity, a product, and a project. Your commodity is the raw farm product or an agricultural input. So that could be milk, tomatoes, cattle, oranges, wheat. It could be, I don't like a fleece. Is that what you call it? Like whatever it is, like the raw wool off of a um, sheep. There's a lot more. It could be eggs. So I'd love for you to write down what the commodity is that you're here for. You really want to limit your commodities to like 3 to 5 commodities for this grant. Now you're turning that commodity into a product, and we're going to talk about the different value added ways that you could turn that commodity into a product. But the product basically is something made from the commodity that customers will buy. So that includes things like organic packaged milk, local tomatoes, cheese, flour, juice, soap, lip balm, jam. There's different types of value added, but they all uh, create an end product. So you want only at most, sorry, I should say most 3 to 5 commodities. One commodity is probably the best. So 1 to 5 commodities, you really only want like 1 to 3 products. Let's look at this slide real quick to define what those products could be. There are 5 types of value add in the VAPG. Your product has to fit one. So, change in physical state, that's the one that people most often think of as value added. So, that's your oranges into marmalade, your tomatoes into a tomato sauce, your herbs into an herbal skin balm. Okay, your cattle into a steak or a sausage. The second is the way it's produced enhances its value. So this could be that you sell free range beef. So you're enhancing the value of your beef by actually raising it as free range. Now you can charge more money for um, I'm guessing actually I put free range, but that's more like chicken, grass fed, that should say. So if you grass fed beef in the store will sell for a higher price point than regular beef. So that's your value add. Organic tomatoes sell for a higher price point than tomatoes. So that's your value add. That's the way that you're producing the commodity is actually enhancing its value. Physical segregation, this is the best example for this is gluten-free oats. You are segregating physically the production of the item, and that in some way enhances its value. So gluten-free oats, they're grown separately from wheat in the field. They're processed separately from any wheat source. And so therefore you can charge more for them than oats that are not gluten-free. Farmer ranch-based renewable energy. I've never actually seen one of these applications, but they are eligible. So that would be something like walnut shell biofuel. And then locally produced. So this is only for edible products. You can't do locally produced flowers or locally produced lip balm. But you can do, say, greens marketed as local and sold within 400 miles of your farm or the state in which it's grown. That's what local means, 400 miles with 400 miles from the farm or the state in which it is grown. So if you are producing a crop and you're selling it as local, then that is its own value add. Okay, so let's go back. Commodity, 1 to 5. Products, 1 to 3. Now you have your commodity, now you have your product. What's your project? So, for you to be eligible for the Value Added Producer Grant, you actually need a project that is the work you're asking the grant to fund to make or sell that product, like processing, marketing, sales expansion. The work that you're proposing you do has to be part of increasing the number of customers buying your product and the revenues you make selling the product. So it's not just business as usual and you want someone giving you some money. You have to present to them a vision for how you are going to increase your customer base and increase your revenue. Now that you have those three, so you have your commodity, you have your product, you have your project. So let's kind of look through and make sure those things are eligible. And if not, tweak them. So we just talked about the 5 ways to look at your product and answer this question: is your product eligible? A few other details there. You must currently be growing the commodity. So again, if you're tomatoes, making it into tomato sauce, you have to be a farm that's been growing tomatoes. It can't be your first, that once you're funded, it'll be your first year ever planting tomatoes. And you must also own over 50% of the raw commodity. So using that example still, if you're making tomato sauce, you don't need to have grown over 50% of all of the ingredients that are in there. But if you're applying as tomatoes being turned into tomato sauce, over 50% of the tomatoes that are going into the tomato sauce for the 3 years of your project have to be grown by you. So if your project says by year 3, over the 3 years, we're going to sell 6,000 jars, it's going to take us 12,000 pounds to make that 6,000 jars. You will have had to, over those 3 years, have grown 6,001 pounds of tomatoes at the least. So that's how you can kind of tell if your product is eligible. Now you want to look and see if your project is eligible. Again, the project is the work that you're doing to expand your customer base and expand your revenue. Project requirements have to expand the applicant's customer base, have to increase the applicant's revenue, and then they has to have a budget that's composed of eligible expenses. We had started talking about expenses. Now let's finish up that conversation. So the eligible expenses, to brainstorm, I like using these 6 buckets. So there's administrative expenses. This is just a tool to get me thinking through all the things that could be funded for a given project. Different administrative expenses. So designing or purchasing a financial accounting system, a food safety certification, which I ended up listing twice here, processing and production, paying a co-packer, purchasing other ingredients, packaging, labels. There often is a lot of expenses that come up in that part of the grant. Distribution, shipping fees for e-commerce, mileage for deliveries, renting cold storage, farmers market fees, custom shipping boxes, kind of everything related to getting the product to the final customer. Anything that's getting from the field to processing is not covered. It's everything from processing to the final customer. Marketing and promotion. So distribution could also include like 3PL working with a third-party logistics firm and their fees, or working with a distributor. Marketing and promotion. So this is where a lot of the excitement comes in, because all the things you think of related to market, I won't say all, most of the things you think of related to marketing can be covered by this grant. So signage, advertising your product, social media ads, website design, mailers, radio ads, physical, ads in local magazines. What else? What else is good ones? little like inserts that go in the boxes to promote the specific product. So it is important to note this is not marketing for your general farm. This is marketing for the product and your farm. Um, yeah, a wide range. And with marketing promotions, this is an area where I both think of like physical things. So your actual, flyers and printed collateral, they call it, and services. So working with the different marketing professionals that are going to be able to do this stuff um, on a really high level. General operating, so routine maintenance to keep the equipment in working condition, equipment or supplies. Equipment, I should say, with a value of less than $5,000 or supplies. Supplies don't have the $5,000 cap. Utilities, so utility charges to run a processing facility, and then staff. And staff, sometimes it's actually helpful to think through all of these layers and what physical goods are, would I want to get covered in one of these buckets? What staffing, so that's like in-house staffing, whether it's hourly or salaried staff, and then what contractual labor of professionals that I can't necessarily have on my staff full time, but I want to contract to do that type of project. Some examples of staff that could get covered under your project are a CSA manager, a salesperson, um, other employees that are like someone who's at the farmer's market, people who are in the processing, people who are in the shipping of the product, people who are doing your social media marketing. These people have to they cannot have ownership or be an immediate family member. Ownership time can be included in your grant, but that is in kind. It's not part of what you ask for grant funding to cover. Okay, we talked about that. So we talked about the expenses. So once you have that, so you have kind of, is my commodity eligible? Is my product eligible? Check. My project is eligible. Check. Eligible. Check. The budget expenses that I'm looking for are eligible. Check. Now you also have to ask yourself this underlying question, which is your farm eligible? There are different there are four different eligible applicant business structures. They're called independent producer, ag producer group, farmer or rancher cooperative, and a majority controlled producer based business. I'm not going to go into the specifics of each one because it's not relevant to a lot of you. But the big thing to know is independent producer is the majority of the folks that I see applications from. And in whatever business structure you have, the majority of the owners have to be part of both the day-to-day operations of both the farm and the value-added venture. So it really is geared towards owner operators, not, just people who've invested in a farm and hire people to run it. This is for people who are actually on the day-to-day level, part of both the growing of the commodity and the processing of it into a value-added product and the sales. It doesn't mean you have to be like the only person doing those things, but if you're kind of a farm manager and this is your part, like a large part of the work that you do in the world, then that's more what they're geared to. Um, Other requirements of the farm, you must be able to attest to things like you have no federal delinquencies on taxes. So there's like a number of, attestations that you have to be able to make. So once you know that you're eligible and you kind of figure out what your project is, you're going to have to decide which application or what, how do I say this? The application that you have to submit is nuanced to what type of project you are proposing. If you're proposing the planning grant, then you're just going to use what they call the simplified application. Simplified application just means the application without these additional attachments that we're talking about specifically here. If you're going to do a working capital grant, which is the majority of you, then there are two different types of projects. There's what they call a market expansion project. That means that you have been selling the product for at least 2 years and you're not focusing on selling into a new geographic area or demographic with your project. You've been making this product, you've been selling this product, now you just want to be making and selling more of it. So you're just expanding what you already do. This type of project is only applicable to independent producers. So that's okay. Most of you are probably independent producers. So the other folks, the ag producer group, the majority rancher cooperative, and the majority controlled producer-based businesses, they can't apply for this type of project. If you're requesting less than $50,000, so $49,999, you just fill out the application in the application portal. I wouldn't say there's no attachments because, I recommend that you have letters of support and other things like that, but there's none of these other types of plans that we're going to talk about that are required if you're asking for more than $50,000. If you're requesting for more than $50,000, equal to or more than $50,000 in grant funding under this market expansion, you need to fill out the application and you also need either a business plan or marketing plan, which you can write yourself. So that's market expansion. Emerging market is that the product has been sold for less than 2 years and or the project is focused on selling into a new geographic area or a new demographic area. So this could be that, if you've been selling the product for 10 years, but now you're saying like, we want to repackage it to appeal to Gen Z who we've never sold before. That could be emerging market, or it could be we've just been selling this project for our product for a year. So that they call emerging market. There's a few more things that you need to include in an emerging market application if you're asking for more than $50,000. That's because you don't really have proof of concept yet. You haven't shown, you haven't really proved in some other way that there are people to buy the product and that you can meet that demand. So if you're asking for equal to or more than $50,000 in funding, you do have to attach a third-party feasibility study and a business plan. That feasibility study is it's a much bigger lift. So some people definitely do the larger emerging market grants, but a lot of times what folks will do is you apply for a planning grant first to help pay for that third-party feasibility study. And then once you have the feasibility study, you actually can apply for the emerging market grant with that feasibility study. If you're asking for less than $50,000 in grant funding and your emerging market, you still can just use the simplified application. So one thing you might be asking yourself now is that if you were hoping to use the VAPG to cover an expense, and you now know that it's ineligible, say you did want to turn your barn into a processing facility, you might be thinking to yourself, well, should I just skip applying altogether? I would like to just offer a little challenge to that viewpoint. Before you decide that the program isn't right for you, I'd really encourage you to go back, pause the recording, look at that list of eligible expenses, and think about all the things that would fit under the eligible expenses. And then think about what your cash flow would look like if half to 3/4 of those expenses were covered by outside funding. What money would that free up for you what money would that free up for you? And is that enough money to cover some of the other costs that you're looking to get covered that aren't eligible for this grant? A lot of times this grant can be a great piece, like a puzzle piece of the entire um, puzzle that is the idea you have for your farm's growth. So I don't want you just to toss it out because that one thing isn't eligible. Potentially, if you get all these other things covered, now all of a sudden those things are helping your sales grow, your revenue's higher, your expenses are lower. Often that means more profit left over. That profit is what can help you pay for those things that are not eligible for the grants. And you can also use your application to apply for loans that could help with other expenses. Um, I have former clients that have used their same application to apply and get FSA loans and other loans that will help them then pay for some of the things they were originally looking at the VAPG to fund. So, are you ready to apply? So, if you're still here and you know now what your project is, what your commodity is, what your product is, what your project is, that your farm is eligible, you've kind of decided, okay, there's enough things that I can get covered in the budget category that this seems like a really good grant for my farm. Then let's just think about if this is the year to do it. This is a big question that a lot of farms come to me with when I do a one-on-one call with them. They want to know, like, am I big enough? Do I have enough sales? Am I ready enough to make an application that's really strong? As the grant gets more competitive, I think this is a really good question to ask yourself because you don't have to apply this year. Like you could wait another year until you've had more sales, et cetera, et cetera. So the other things that I look for when I'm kind of screening a potential one-on-one client is do they have positive annual profits for at least positive average profits over the past 3 years if you're applying for a working capital grant. So if you're applying for a working capital grant, you're going to show your historic P&L. I'm trying to think if that is required now or just what I recommend. You talk about it a lot in the application, and I always then attach it as well. Um, and it does ask you specifically to talk about your profitability. Reviewers have told me that why they're asking that question is to have some confidence in the business. So it's okay, again, if you've had, a loss for a year. Most people did in 2021 when we were applying, like 2020 potentially did not look good for them. Um, but as long as we can then show an average that has profitability, that shows that the business is sound and that when they invest in you through the grant funding, you're going to be able to stay in business through those years. You also want to show that your project for growth will break even within the next 6 years. So part of what we do both one-on-one and in the mentorship is we project out a 6-year P&L to include with the application, whether it's simplified or one of the larger grant asks. And that's because reviewers have told me that they want to see that it's okay. So again, it's a 3-year timeline, max timeline for a working capital application. And they have told me it's okay if you don't break even within those 3 years, but they do want to see that at least 3 years post grant funding that the project's going to break even. They want to know that if they've invested in this, that it's actually going to be a part of your farm that is sustainable and that the farm itself is sustainable. They want to put money into farms and projects that are going to exist in the future. That's the whole point of this funding is to grow farms so that they're more profitable and therefore more sustainable. So that's another thing you have to look at is yes, you'll have the grant funding to offset the expenses of all that marketing and other things in those 3 years. So then after that, what happens when the funding goes away? Are the revenues enough to pay for the remaining expenses each year? A few more eligibility resources. If you do still have questions, you can go to our Instagram at Raleigh Creative Strategy. A great thing there is also you can see a lot of the funded applications, which we're going to talk about now. And then there's also like question and answer. There's a ton of resources there. And you can also go onto my website at ellenraleigh.com/resources. There's two great things there. There's a webinar series that I did with an organization called CAF, in which it's a whole 3-part series. One whole part of that series is just about eligibility. And then there's also this flow chart that helps you determine which type of application you're looking at. The simplified application, the marketing plan one, the business plan one, the feasibility plan one, etc. Okay, so now let's talk about some inspiration. This is a great way to start thinking about what different projects are potential for your farm. So, one client that I have talked about for years now is Little Apple Treats. When they came to me, they had been selling their apple cider caramels into farmers markets, and they were so popular. You know, people loved them. They were also selling into wholesale, and in wholesale, they were kind of selling, but not really that much. They were a little disappointed. Like people loved them, but we're not getting much traction in stores. And really, they saw wholesale as a place that they could really grow. It doesn't require them to be there every week, at the booth. And also, it's a way to just generate more volume sales. Um, so that's what we were hoping to fix with a value-added producer grant. When we looked at this was their packaging, and they had purchased this type of packaging because if you've worked with it before, it's a base and then a sleeve. So all the bases are the same, which means you can print a lot of them at a time. When you print larger quantities, your price is lower. And then they could get these custom sleeves. So overall, the price of the package was lower for the physical packaging because they were able to save money on the base rather than getting a whole box that was different for each flavor. The problem when we ran the numbers was that actually the cost of labor of assembling each base was making it so that the product was quite costly. And in wholesale, in some cases, they were actually losing money because of the actual cost, what we call the cost of goods, the cost of producing the finished product. The other issue was that this is 3 different flavors of the same product. You can't really tell that as a customer. And it turns out you can't really tell that as a buyer from wholesale either. So wholesale buyers were just buying one flavor instead of multiple. If they were buying multiple, a customer couldn't differentiate between them. So it was just meaning slow sales. What we did with their value-added producer grant application, we shifted to this new packaging. This new packaging was a different box for each flavor. The biggest investment in being able to do that, the reason they hadn't been able to do it in the past, is that to get the box cost pretty low, you have to buy a large quantity. That first order of a large quantity is pretty difficult for most small farms. But with the value-added producer grant, we were able to offset the cost of that first purchase. Then their sales grew. Now they had the revenue to actually cover purchasing these boxes in the future. So it included design related to that. It included the actual purchase of the packaging, the other ingredient costs of making the apple cider caramels, their sell sheet design, and professional photography so that they could get the product up on their website, on their sell sheets, have collateral for buyers, and all of that. And one thing I always like to note is actually look at that packaging and how beautiful it is. You can see it was featured in Martha Stewart, and it actually brought down the cost of goods of the product so that it was now able to be sold in wholesale and be profitable because that first order, we were able to scale the quantity that they're purchasing of these boxes. And for that first order, have value added producer grant funding to cover a bulk of the cost. Joanne said the USDA value-added packaging grant that Ellen got for us was critical in improving our branding, leading to a huge jump in sales and the ability to be picked up by larger accounts such as Italy, Oliver's, and Buy Right Markets. Joanne and Dan ended up going on to apply for two more value-added producer grants that were both funded. So they stuck with simplified applications and used them as a strategy for incremental growth, which is something you can definitely do if you don't want a huge project to have to handle. It's a great, I've worked with a ton of small farms that a simplified application that less than $50,000 is actually the perfect size project for them and a really great way to over time build sales. So my big tip for you there is that it's only value added if it adds value, meaning in the first phase of the grant writing process that I take people through in both the mentorship and one-on-one, I call it the plan phase. And one of the main things we're doing is quantifying your value add. We're quantifying your value add, and then we're creating a sales projection that includes both customer base growth, and revenue growth. And it's really important to do those three things first, because if we hadn't done the work of quantifying the value add, something you have to do for your application, we wouldn't have realized that they were losing money in wholesale the way that they were doing it now. If you have if you have a project that's based on a product that is not actually making the farm money, then you're not going to get that project funded. And you would be surprised how many times, it makes sense. A lot of farmers, um, you might resonate with this. You're in it because you're passionate about feeding people. You're passionate about the environment. You like to work with your hands. You're not necessarily in it because you want to sit with a spreadsheet and figure out all your costs. Thankfully, that's where people like me can come in and we bring our skills to the table. But if you're going to do this yourself, you really have to put the hat on of business before as you're looking at your project and how you present your project to the USDA. Another great example I love is Yisrael Family Urban Farm. They're in Sacramento, California. They took herbs and they're making it into soap. One of the things I love about this project is the value add there is like stupendous, because of how little herbs it takes to make a bar of soap. The difference between selling herbs bulk, dry, just herbs, fresh herbs, and the profit per pound you can make versus selling it as a soap. The soap is a lot more profit per pound. Things that they got included, they were going to scale their soap production. They had been selling out at farmers markets every year, and so not going to farmers markets year round, but they were kind of stuck in this place that they didn't have the money to scale production, or attend farmers markets more, but they knew if they could attend farmers markets more, they could sell more. So they're kind of caught in this little bit of a catch 22. So in order to both be able to scale production and then scale sales, we included things like Lion oil tanks, bulk ingredient purchases, production assistant wages, a market staff person, soap display stands, farmers market signage, professional website redesign, and digital advertising. This might be something you resonate with. It's like when you are the one-man band of your farm, it's like you can't be both producing and selling at the same time. So you're kind of cutting off time from everything. And sometimes that means that you're just spinning in this tiny little box. And you know that if I could go to farmers markets more, I could sell more, but you don't have time to go to farmers markets more because you have to be producing the stuff. So that's where we can actually pay for staff members so that it frees up your time and you can actually grow sales and production. Widner Farms, this was my first mentee who was awarded the larger grant ask of $250,000, which is why I love talking about her or them. I should say they're a husband and wife team. Um, so they applied for their first grant for their direct sales of beef and pork. They were moving to a model where they wanted to sell online and deliver. They're pretty close to Seattle and Bellingham, Washington, and saw the potential for, instead of people having to come to the farm, that they could do delivery. So they included packaging, shipping materials, USDA certified processing fees, offsite frozen storage, fulfillment center fees, photography, marketing, video production, newsletter marketing software, website hosting fees, digital advertising fees, and farm stand signage. We did get a second of her grants funded, their grants funded last year with one-on-one services. She realized how much work it was. Brianna's who I've worked with. That's why I keep saying she, even though it's a husband-wife team. She realized how much work it is to write the grant and decided the second time around just to have me do it. And we got a second one funded for their chicken operation. Their beef and sale pork did so well. Now she saw the opportunity to get funding to also scale the chicken operation. And the last one I'll talk about today is Ramona Ranch Vineyards. They are a winery. We focused on their estate grown wines because of that requirement that over 50% of the crop has to be grown by the applicant. So they have many wines. Some of them they purchase the grapes. We focused on their estate grown wines. And they were in a similar, maybe catch 22, where they wanted to increase their tasting room hours. They're close to San Diego. There's a lot of tourist interest in what they do. But they were missing a lot of it because of the days and time, like the amount of hours that they had staff, they could pay for staffing. So they felt like if they could have their tasting room open longer, then they would have the sales to be able to make more of their estate, be able to, this was interesting because it wasn't making more, it was being able to sell through it quicker. They were a vineyard, so it's pretty like they could plant more grapes that wouldn't be covered by the value-added producer grant because it's only post-harvest. That's one way to increase your annual revenue. The other way to increase your annual revenue is to sell through your product quicker. So instead of, selling through 1 year of production over, say, 3 years, if you can condense that and sell it through in a year, you can oftentimes increase your annual revenue because you're selling through your product quicker. And that was their main goal. So things we got covered were bottles and corks, product labels, oak barrels, advertisements in local magazines. And I'm pretty sure, I don't know why I didn't include this, it was the tasting room staff hours for the first, I think it was like year or year and a half. There was that, the fact that they were going to be open an extra day. It was like that day's worth of hours of staffing. Um, Terry Kearns, who I worked with on that application, said, oh, that should say Ramona Ranch, not Little Apple Treats. I am so glad for the funds the Value-Added Producer Grant provided. In a year when the wine industry experienced a slump, we were able to hold sales steady and provide additional shifts to our employees. Please know, Ellen, that the work you're doing makes a huge difference for small farmers like us. So that's examples of how people have used this funding to grow their farm businesses. I think it's a great way, again, for you to start thinking about how can I use this funding to grow my farm business? What are the potential routes? What are the potential goals? And start refining what that project is that you want to get funded by the grant. So, lastly, I'm going to talk about the five-phase approach that I recommend for writing a application worth funding. First off, so the biggest thing is, and the biggest mistake I made when I started out writing grants was I would start by writing a grant. You open the application, you see the questions, you're like, oh, I kind of know the answer to that. I'm gonna like type a little bit in here. And you end up with this like scattershot application that you end up having to change a billion times because your idea changes and it's a huge mess. So that's where I started developing this approach and why I am very organized and my timeline is very specific in how I approach these grants because you at most have a 3-month window to write them. And I'm typically writing, you know, 5 of them and helping another 10 people write theirs. So the first phase is the plan phase. That is the phase that you're really looking at your costs so that you can quantify your value add. You have to quantify the value add for them. By quantifying the value add, I do not mean so a lot of people when I say like what is the added value, they might get pretty romantic and talk about how it increases access to local foods and how it's good for the environment and other things like that. That is not what this application is interested in. This is a farm business application. Um, and they are interested in when they're talking about how does your product add value to your commodity, they're talking about dollars and cents. How does either if it's the way that you grow it or the local or the fact that you sell it as local, if that's your value add, you're really looking at how much more in the marketplace can I sell this than I could if I didn't have that like free range, grass fed, organic, local category name to attach to my product. If you're a change in physical state, you're looking at how much money can I sell this commodity for? How much does it cost me to grow this commodity? So, what is my profit? How much does it cost me to make the product? How much can I sell the product for? And then what is my profit per pound of commodity by selling it, therefore, as a finished product? And how do those relate to each other? So, what's my profit per pound selling it as a raw commodity? What's my profit per pound selling it as a finished product? And what is the difference there? Um, you also, once you figure that out, you also want to find a realistic research-backed projection for growth that will sustain beyond the grant project period. So you want to actually create a sales projection so that you have baselines and targets for both your customer count and your revenue. And you want that to be backed by research. You want to actually include the research in your grant application. Um, and you want it to be realistic. So one of the biggest mistakes I see here from farms is that they feel this pressure. I'm asking for money. I have to show this, enormous growth for the grant for me to get funded. And they present sometimes these projections that they're, tripling, quadrupling, even more than that growth year to year. That isn't needed, first of all, and it doesn't look very grounded. You have to present an idea that you can pull off operationally. Like I said, they do want to see that you'd break even within 3 years post grant period. So that's 6 years from the time of the project start date. But that's a long time for you to break even. You don't need to do it in a year. You don't need to do it in 2 years. So, really do some research, look at what growth could actually be, do some demographic research. These are all things that we go into more detail with in either one-on-one or mentorship. But just today, I want you to have the framework that You want to build a sales projection, and you want that sales projection to be based on some marketing research that you've done. And you don't have to make it a wild and fantastical amount of growth. Next, we go into collecting. So the main two things we're collecting are um, real life costs of the budget items. So we're collecting, old invoices of how much different packaging costs, or getting stuff quoted out by, marketing professionals, or finding the small equipment that you want to purchase and getting a screenshot of what it costs online. And then we're also collecting stellar letters of commitment. So you want to base your budget on real costs. So definitely collect those. And you also, even now that I don't think they require them anymore, but I still highly recommend that you have letters of commitment. And so we want to collect those as well. And those letters, we want both actual commitment from people to purchase the product or work on the project. And we also want some great pull quotes that we can use for things that we can't find research for. So you're going to do that market research with like online. But you also want to use your letters of commitment as a way for things that you can't really find sources for online. You could have buyers say, for example, in their letters. Then once we have all that, we're gonna actually make our budget. There is this whole art to how you have to balance the budget so that you end up with that one-to-one match, and you can include cash and you can include these other sources as well. My main advice today is make sure that you're meeting the requirements of the grant, so those eligibility requirements and the match requirements, but that you also set yourself up to have maximum flexibility during the grant period. So the way that you do that is by having kind of bigger buckets of expenses. Those buckets of expenses, you'll want a bucket of expenses, and then you'll want to validate that total budget category very specifically. Like I said, I'm collecting some sort of documentation for every cent that I include in the budget. So I'll say, for example, like supplies, and then that'll be my bigger category. And then I validate that with individual, like we're gonna need 6,000 of this type of jar, and that type of jar is $1 each. And then we're also gonna need, and it's like all very specific, so they really believe in my total quantity. But because I have them all rolled up into that that larger category, once the grant is actually funded, it's the category that they go off of when you're asking for reimbursements. So that gives you some flexibility, instead of making each of those specific types of supplies their own line item. It would kind of lock you into only having that much money for that specific supply. By grouping them together, now there's some flexibility in real life. So make sure you both have those specifics so that the budget is strong, but also the way that you format the budget can give you some of that flexibility. Once all of that is done, then we move into the writing phase. I'd say one last thing about the budget. Often the USDA RD staff in your state will look at your budget before you submit it for ineligible, and they'll kind of review it for ineligible expenses. I highly recommend you take them up on that offer if they are willing to do that. So I'll usually get the USDA to look at the budget. And then once that's all done, I'm ready to write. Now I have all my ducks in a row. I know what my value add is. I know what my sales projection is. I know what items are in my budget, and therefore my work plan. Like what are the different steps we're going to take over these 3 years? Once I know all that, now I can sit down and write the application. When I write the application, my biggest advice to you, because the thing I see, I have my own applications that I write, and then I individually review every application from the mentorship every year. And the biggest mistake I see is people apologizing and apologizing for the state of their farm or for any mistakes they've made in the past, for where their sales are now and that they're not higher than they are, and presenting things, over presenting things. You need the detail. You need to back up your arguments. But if you get too wordy, it's like you're explaining yourself. It's like when someone just keeps running on and you lose their train of thought. Um, you want to approach your application with confidence. Like, my farm is where it's at today because I've put in really hard work. And like, yeah, that's $2,000 worth of sales. That's where we are. And I've done that. And now I have a really clear plan of how I'm going to get to $50,000 in sales. And I've thought through all the different steps it's going to take us to get there. And I have an answer for everything you're going to ask me. So let's go. That's the energy of your application, not I've only had $2,000 in sales so far. I was like, last year I lost some of the onion crop. And so then this year I wanted to plant peppers, but then I don't really know if it's going to work, but I'm pretty sure it might work because my like neighbor can do it. Like, that is not, that might be how you feel inside. I get it. I'm a small business owner. That's how I feel inside sometimes, but you have to put that aside and you have to come to the application with confidence and with a clear plan and present it that way. And then the last phase is submitting. So once your application is all done, then there's an application portal that you submit everything up onto the portal, and that gets submitted to the USDA and they have a whole process of reviewing it. That this year, the submissions are due April 15th at 1 p.m. And then typically you hear in about September whether your application has been funded for funding to start in October. Oh, one more tip for you is to start early and set aside the time that's needed. So the mentorship started this week. There's still time to come in. I recommend at least having 8 weeks um, to write your application. Mentees spend about 80 to 120 hours putting together an application. So at 8 weeks, you can see that's about like 10, at least 10 hours a week to put towards the application. So you really want to give yourself the time to do that and not rush it all at the end. If you're interested in the grant writing mentorship, I just want to take this time to give you a little more information about how it works. So I do one-on-one grant writing. For this year, I'm not taking any more one-on-one grant writing clients. The mentorship is the only other way to work with me if you'd like to work with me this year. And it's a really great option for farmers who want to write the application themselves, want to learn the skills of grant writing, because you can use those skills towards other grants as well. And also farms that maybe don't have the budget to hire a grant writer. So you're writing the grant yourself, but I'm there guiding you and supporting you along the way. The main resources of the mentorship, there's a guidebook that walks you through the whole process, all 5 phases, and every piece of what you have to do for this specific grant. That is connected to a whole bunch of templates and tools, the ones that I use in my one-on-one grant writing services. So there's Excel spreadsheets that help you figure out your cost of goods. There's Excel spreadsheets that help you create a sales projection. There's Excel spreadsheets that help you do a projected 6-year P&L. We have templates for all your commitment letters. We have research resources, like all sorts of stuff. Then there is both recorded trainings and live calls. So this is the new thing this year that I'm very excited about. It used to be that we had live calls every other week for an hour and a half, and a lot of that would be me teaching. Every year, people have said we want more time to work through our application. So this year, I've decided is the year to do that. So the way that that works is I have the trainings recorded. So every other week, every 2 weeks, you're kind of moving into a different phase. And there is that hour and a half training that's a recording from last year. You watch that and it brings you through all the steps. It kind of helps you move through the plan, whichever phase we're in. Then we have our office hours. So every week there's 45 minutes of office hours that you get to come in and face to face have support, live support from me to answer your questions and work on your application. So you're still getting all of the information from the live calls, but instead of a lot of our face-to-face time being spent, on one-way information sharing, it's a two-way collaborative time for us to actually work on your application. And the one of the other really wonderful resources or part services that's included in the mentorship is that I do a draft review. So you, at the end of March, get me your draft, and I will actually go through and track changes and make edits and make comments on your specific draft of your application so that you can strengthen it before you submit it. I do want to mention the other amazing part of the mentorship that's helped a lot of folks is that I have all the redacted applications that folks have felt comfortable with me sharing of that I've written that have been approved, funded, sorry. So as part of the mentorship dashboard of templates and tools, you can actually read the applications that have gotten funded and see the exact way that I craft the different arguments and answer the questions that the USDA is asking. If you are interested in that, we have weekly calls going through April 14th. We did have our first one, but there's no reason not to come and join us now. You still have plenty of time to get an application together. To do that, you would just go to ellenraleigh.com/grant writing, and you can see if you go to my head of my homepage accidentally, you can just click on this toolbar and it'll take you this headline bar. Oh, I don't know. I might have to reshare because of the screen that I shared. Oh no, it says Google Chrome, so this should show it to you. Okay. Yeah. On this page, if you scroll down, oh yeah, you can just click right up here, join the mentorship, and you'll see there's two different levels. There's the group level, which is everything I just talked about. And then there's the focus level, which also includes 3 60-minute one-on-one sessions with me. So it's just me and you, and we're just working on your specific application. Those 3 sessions can also be, hey, can you do this for me for an hour? And I could pull research, or you could give me your budget and I could do the budget, balance it. You basically get 3 hours of my work time on your application. You just go down. You can either pick monthly payments for each level or just one payment, and that'll take you to the payment portal. Once you do that, you'll get a welcome email, and then you'll be able to come into the dashboard and you'll see all the timing for the office hours. Here's all our virtual trainings. You have your guidebook, and then here's all those different tools and templates for each phase of working on your application. And that is what I have for you today. I hope that you got some of your questions answered through today's webinar, that you also got some inspiration and some ideas on how this grant can fund projects that you have for your farm. Whether we work together on an application or not, I do hope that if the program is something that your farm could use to grow, that you take the time to apply. Okay, bye.